Welcome to our third SVP Dallas Workshop. Today we will focus on entrepreneurship. My name is Prisma Garcia and I am the Director of Capacity Building for SVP Dallas. SVP Dallas is a group of engaged community leaders that are committed to improving lives and maximizing social impact through the application of their skill set. SVP cultivates philanthropists, organizations, and invests in innovative solutions. Today at our workshop, we will listen and learn from our SVP partners. We have with us today Kimberly O'Neill, Michael Kornman, Jorge Baldor, Kenneth Barth, and we will also be listening from the experience and the organization, My Possibilities, and we have with us today Michael Thomas. And we will join us today. Thank you for joining us today as we're discussing how an entrepreneurial spirit and that type of approach will help us be more resilient during this time of crisis. We will have this conversation to hopefully provide mutual learning, and we'll learn from the experiences Michael is having at My Possibilities. And we'll also be taking questions from the audience later. If you'd like, you can follow us on social media and do a hashtag SVP Workshop for any of your postings. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to our partners who will introduce themselves. And we're going to start off with Kim O'Neill.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kimberly O'Neill. I have been a partner with SVP since 2016, and I currently serve on the board of directors. My background, about 30 years now, a little bit over 30 years between the public sector and social sectors, primarily with experience in municipal management around the country. I'm a former city manager. About 10 years ago, I walked away from it all because I wanted to focus on community development without any restrictions. And so now I spend a lot of time talking about the intersection of government and philanthropy throughout the community, primarily in North Texas, but also around the Northeast as well. I'm the CEO of Giving Blueprint. We are a consulting firm that concentrates on igniting the power within communities. And I'm also the founder of Cause Studio. 5 years ago, I launched that to focus on capacity building with smaller nonprofits, startup nonprofits, primarily in the North Texas area, but we are now going to be launching a virtual incubator for organizations around the country. As it relates to my philanthropic background, I've been in government and philanthropy for as long as I can remember. It's just something that I grew up with, but current activations include working with SVP. I teach about the intersection of government and philanthropy for the Dana Jewett residency program. I'm also a founding member of the Heritage Giving Fund, which is the first Black giving circle in the state of Texas. And through my company, Giving Blueprint, we donate a portion of our proceeds annually to charitable entities, primarily focusing on those startup nonprofits as well. And I'm glad to be here today and share what I know.
Thank you, Kim. If we can just go through, we'll have Ken go next with his introduction.
Thank you very much, Prisma. And my goodness, I'm sitting here looking at this. I've been in the software industry for about 30 plus years. I've been lucky enough to have some multiple successful exits, which means I just surround myself with really good people. I've got 2 businesses currently that have got fantastic people, which leaves me a lot of time to focus on some philanthropic endeavors. The things that I love and I'm really interested in are SVP, of course. I mean, SVP was the forerunner of entrepreneurial endeavors and really done a huge impact. And that led me into working with the great folks, Susan, Jennifer over at United Way, really working at what the ground floor, which actually became the Social Innovation Accelerator over there. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm the board chair of City Year Dallas. I'm on the Arboretum board. I'm also on the board of Dallas Kids First. Love DISD, a huge volunteer for DISD because I got a particular soft spot for education. And that's kind of me in a nutshell. So take it away.
Thank you, Ken. Jorge Baldor, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sorry about that. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Excited about this program today and being asked to participate in it. I currently serve as chair of the Small and Medium Business Subcommittee of the Dallas County Economic Recovery Committee. I serve on the Parkland Foundation Board. I am chair of the DHA Housing Solutions and founder of Latino Center for Leadership Development. Nonprofit experience is really focused with the After 8 to Educate program that has been a strong partnership with SVP, and the support of SVP has been crucial in making that a reality. In the for-profit sector, it's well, for supposedly for-profit sector is the Mercado 369, our retail location with art and artisan goods from all of Latin America. So looking forward to being a part of this discussion.
And
great, thank you. Michael Kornman is next, if you'd give us your short
sure.
intro.
Thanks, Prisma. Michael Kornman, I'm excited to be here today. I'm a managing partner of NCK Capital, which is a lower middle market focused private equity firm here in Dallas. I'm also on the SVP board. I've been involved in SVP for about 3 years now, and during that time I was involved in the impact investing initiative at SVP, and really excited about continuing to add value to nonprofits through SVP consulting.
Thank you, Michael. Now we'll have an introduction from our organization. We have Michael Thomas here with us from My Possibilities, and he's going to share a little bit more about his not just himself, but also his organization and the different things that have been happening at My Possibilities, because although there's been a lot happening in the world and in our city, we know that My Possibilities has had a lot of new opportunities coming up. So Michael Thomas, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, Prisma. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Thomas. I'm the executive director here at My Possibilities. I have been here with the organization since April of 2010, but have spent a little over 15 years specifically in disabilities-related nonprofits, both here in Texas and then also in the state of Nevada. We are, the Cliff Notes version of the organization is that My Possibilities serves as really a comprehensive pathway to inclusion for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. We primarily do that through continued education programs. We run a kind of a college-style educational model here in North Texas. But on top of that, therapeutic programming, respite opportunities for individuals and their families, transportation, and soon to be residential as well. And then one of the bigger components of what we do now is both the job training, job placement, and then ongoing support for adults with disabilities who are working in North Texas. So I said that as comprehensive. There are things that we don't do for sure, but our game plan is to try and take any individual and their family that comes through and serve them the best that we possibly can to get them into the community. So with that said, we serve, I said, adults with disabilities. We passionately and kind of in a charming sort of way identify our guys as hipsters. It stands for hugely important people. So from here on out, when I say hipsters, I'm not talking about skinny jeans and granola and man buns. It's the wonderful people that we serve. And for us, hipsters are 18 and older, have a wide variety of cognitive disability. It ranges from autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, a traumatic brain injury, and there's truly over 100 other diagnoses. But at the end of the day, people are people, regardless of their ability level, their diagnosis, the color of their skin, their religion, etc. And so everybody wants to live, work, and play in the community, have meaningful relationships, provide meaningful value in the community. And that's what we work on for everybody that comes in to be served by us. So a little addition, just context on the organization and COVID. We partner specifically with service provider agencies who contract with the state. And the funding mechanism for what we do, while we're an educational organization, the funding comes by way of Health Human Services. And so we don't directly contract with state agencies or the state government. We're an independent 501c3. And when COVID hit for us, it was a few realizations. The first and foremost, I think that certainly was for me, I'm speaking personally now, we acknowledge the importance of our organization to our hipsters in the realm of social connectivity. We know this is where many of their friends are. For me, I underestimated the importance, as many of our guys, when we had to shut down and there was no longer a place for them to attend, to continue learning, it wasn't just a disconnect from education. Many of them don't have access to social media. They don't have access to cell phones. Many of them can't communicate, and so verbally. So there's even if they did have a cell phone, it wouldn't work. Many of them can't read and write, but it doesn't mean they don't have meaningful and valuable relationships. I grossly underestimated the importance of the organization as it relates to being able to connect people. Many of our adults, for the better part of the last 10 weeks, have had to wake up every morning and then get the news that no, we can't go back to my possibilities. And so behavioral issues started showing up in some places, and we adjusted as quickly as possible and began providing teletherapy, respite one-on-one over the internet as well, educational programming as well. And I think that's just the realization that that many organizations had, is that you can still deliver meaningful and valuable services, this way through a screen, not necessarily in person. The other major realization was just how disconnected state government is from the private sector. And it isn't that our organization is not connected to representatives or officials. It's the agencies that procure the funding that really are the ones making the decisions, how completely disconnected they are from our world. And I would imagine it's not specifically just Health Human Services and not specifically just disability services. I imagine that's across the board, education as well. And to use the example, public education continued to remain funded. Schools continue to get funding, teachers continue to get paid, and students continue to get served. But all of the ancillary programs associated with serving kids in the public school system were, completely robbed of funding, because those are based upon the other things that are going on. It's based upon what's coming from the state. And a lot of them are looking from the outside in going, we're still valuable. And in our case, no funding continued to be passed on, which means from March 17th, despite the fact that we've been providing educational services online, we will never be reimbursed for any of that. The loss of 10 weeks of program revenue for this organization is probably about $1.5 million hit for 2020. And it's money that the state budgeted. That's the thing that's extra irritating. It wasn't a call for additional support. It was a call for continued funding of valuable programming, so organizations would exist on the other side of this. Complete realization of how disconnected we are. And so that will change certainly moving forward. And it's that whole fool me once, shame on you. It won't happen a second time for sure. So there's a question that I thought was interesting that I just, again, it's more personal insight, but it was, what is it related to my possibilities that keeps you up at night? And, truth is a lot of things, but the one in the last 10 weeks really that has risen to the top for me is how far away we are from inclusion of this population. And it's in all regards. The one that really came to the top clearly was employment in the last 10 weeks. We, on the front end, had about 80 adults with disabilities who were working in the community, and that had part-time jobs, some of them had just gotten them, others had been there for 5, 7, 10 years. And for as challenging as it is to get them employed in the first place, 66 of 80 lost their jobs within the first few weeks. So while clearly the unemployment issue on a national level is major, I don't know what the number is now, it's something like 35 million, 40 million people are unemployed. People with disabilities were the first people to get cut, no question. To date, of the 66 that we were confirmed lost their jobs, 5 of them we believe are employed again, are going to get their jobs back. there's just so much work to be done. And to go from including somebody with an intellectual disability in the employment world isn't charity. It's valuable and meaningful employment to a good member of a team. And for me, employment is one of the ways that we can best demonstrate that value. And it feels very much like we will have taken a few years, a step, 2 steps, 3 steps back in the fight that we were making a lot of progress on in 2018, 2019. And now we're just going to go back out there and fight to get those guys their jobs back. And so it's that right now, that one keeps me up at night. But there's still housing discrimination in many cities across the country. It is still illegal for a group home of 3 adults with disabilities to live within half a mile of another group home with 3 adults with disabilities, which if you insert any, and I mean any protected class within that sentence, it is clearly the most ridiculous statement that you could have heard in 2020. But I think today the realization is, for as far as we may believe we've come in equal rights across the board, this country has a lot of work to do. And those are specifically the things that I think about probably more often than I should. But it's valuable work. We know that we'll see what inclusion looks like, and it's going to take a while to get there. But with that said, would love to pass it back over to Prisma and dive into some really cool conversations on entrepreneurship and some of the things that we're doing there.
Thank you, Michael. Wow, that's the numbers are just startling. 66 lost their job, and only 5 may get it back soon. So it's just that's only one of the things that you said that really caught my attention. And I know that our partners are also probably taking notes, and the people in the audience. The question box is open, so if ever you want to ask questions, we'll get to those at the end. As far as moving into this conversation, our partners, and not just the partners on this call today, but all of our partners in our community have expertise. And today we're here to talk about entrepreneurship, and very broadly, not necessarily, we think of it as opening a business or small business, or, how do we use entrepreneurship to lift up our organization? And obviously there are a lot of obstacles maybe against us. And so I'm going to turn it over to our partners to provide a partner perspective about the power of entrepreneurship and how having that entrepreneurial approach and attitude can really, create some change in a time where it's, we're suffering from a lot of losses. And so with that said, I'm going to pass it on to Kim O'Neill to kick us off there, and they'll each go around and share their perspective on entrepreneurship and our times.
Yeah. So from my perspective, I really focus on the capacity building aspect. I think there's so much power in entrepreneurship for organizations, whether it be a for-profit, smaller organization, smaller company that's starting, or a nonprofit that's looking to be more innovative. I think at the end of the day, some of the things that I see as it relates to entrepreneurship that could be boosted, you can boost up a little bit, is so many people jump into entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial ideas based on passion and purpose and luck. But after they get to that point, one of the things that they fail to do is to go back and look at their infrastructure and look for opportunities for sustainability, check their data to make sure the data makes sense for them to even continue to move forward. One of the key things that I have to stress when it comes to the power of entrepreneurship, if you want to keep your business, get some insurance. Make sure that you have a rainy day or a reserve fund. Don't be too quick to grow your entity. A lot of times we get really excited. We want to bring on new people, and we don't have the capital to be able to do that. And so what realistically we're doing sometimes as entrepreneurs, through our excitement, we forget that there are people that are helping us to build our businesses. Again, whether it be for-profit, nonprofit, or a hybrid concept between the two. But when we do that and we are not careful, what we end up doing is bringing people into our home. That's what I call the foundational elements of a business. We bring people into our home and we don't have the foundation to be able to keep them at home, which means this person may or may not have given up a job, given up some other types of financial opportunities, and we have not really done our due diligence to save our businesses. When it comes to the power of entrepreneurship, it really does require that you understand HR, human resources, and any other laws that are applicable for you to run the type of business that you're running. And then there are just some basic HR rules that we all have to follow on the state and the federal level. And in some cases, depending upon where you live, there could be some local laws that you also have to follow. One thing that I often see when it comes to businesses trying to grow, bringing people on, they're actually employees, is you'll go throughout their office and you'll never see any documentation about the EEO and any other HR related rules that are required to be posted. And if someone came in and did an audit, that's an immediate fine for your organization. So those are some of the things that that I pay attention to. In this COVID-19 season, I think it has hit us all. One of the things that I think we assumed was that larger organizations were going to be okay because they're more sustainable. They have more revenue sitting in the bank in terms of cash reserves. And what we've seen, especially in the nonprofit community, is that wasn't the case. And so moving out of this, or just shifting a little bit into this COVID, the next part of whatever this COVID-19 season looks like for us, one of the things that every entrepreneur needs to do is have a crisis management plan. You need to have a contingency plan that goes beyond having cash in the bank. For those of you that are in the nonprofit sector, I know the industry has told us, 3 to 6 months. Realistically, we are now looking at, you really need to have a year's worth of cash on reserve in the bank in case anything happens. There's so many organizations, for profit and nonprofit right now, when those PPP funds end, so many organizations are going to have to make that hard decision that they probably would have had to make 8 weeks earlier had they not gotten that PPP money. Think about as you're growing your businesses in terms of the power of entrepreneurship. Again, it's your dream, it's your vision, it's your goal as the leader. But when you also going back to thinking about the people that you bring on board, ensure that you're paying them a livable wage because that impacts employee retention. The more you think about the people that are helping you to do your work, the more powerful your entity and your companies are going to be. When you forget to pay attention to the team that's working with you, and you concentrate just on output and doing good or selling product, what you could potentially end up with are disgruntled people who have to work multiple jobs, people who might like your environment, but have to make a different type of decision because they need to. They need to make more income. And then the other thing that I will harp on, I probably am a broken record in the entrepreneurial community. If you are not looking at some way to give, and you can afford it, to give benefits, health benefits to your employees, be very careful about what you're asking your employees to do. There were so many organizations in this season that I saw sending their employees out to do work and they did not have health care. That is a huge, huge liability for the organization. So as we look at, and as you continue to look at growing your entities, go back to the first floor of your house. A lot of times we look at building the second floor, which are our products and services and programs, but we forget that we can't get to the second floor without first building that foundation on the first floor. That's IT, that's HR, that's legal, the legal requirements, that's your insurance for running the company, and then your insurance, your health insurance as well. And look at, how am I going to sustain this after my first year? How am I going to sustain this after year 5? If you are always in the moment building your business, you can never really own the power of what entrepreneurship can bring to you. And then my last thing that I want to add before I pass it on to Ken Barth is financial management. There's budgeting, and then there's accounting. And then there are the internal controls that help you to match those two things. Budgets are the things that help to project where the revenue is going to come from, what expenses you are you're going to have, but you have to bring in the income in order to match the expenses. And so just because something's in your budget doesn't mean you have the money to move forward. You have to do some estimates and bring that money in before you can actually move forward. And I think we see a lot of businesses that are not doing well because they've not mastered that part. And if you are bringing in significant income, get an accountant. Have somebody help you with filing of the taxes and balancing your books. You can get away with a bookkeeper in the beginning. In the very, very beginning, if you can handle some small revenue that's coming in and expenses, but you really need to look at a combination between a bookkeeper and an accounting firm to help balance and reconcile your books, to help you get with those financial projections so that you can know what you're doing and what you can do and what you're capable of doing throughout the year and years to come as well. I'll pause there and pass it on to Ken.
Great job, Kimberly. Thank you for all that wonderful information. So look, just a couple of things I'd like to add to that. First of all, entrepreneurship is a very personal way to build a business, and it can be used to build your own business. You can also be entrepreneurial in your existing company. You can also be entrepreneurial in your philanthropy, if you will. What's beautiful about entrepreneurship is it actually lets you create the environment that you want. You set the foundation that Kimberly was talking about, and then you build the building with the team. Whenever I'm doing this kind of thing, and listen, let me say this right now. Our world is hurting. Everybody knows that. I mean, with COVID-19, the protests, the rioting, everybody needs help. This is the time, and we got a bunch of wonderful people on this phone, a bunch of leaders. We all need to be out there helping any way we can. And if you're looking to do something, I think it's a great time, because it's a great time to affect change and help the world. There's a lot of pain everywhere. And my thoughts on this, there are three things I always try to do when I'm starting something or getting it going. I try to live by three principles. First and foremost, empathy. Empathy, empathy, empathy. Put yourself in the people's place that you're trying to serve, their situation. I mean, a lot of us on this phone, we probably can't even identify. There are folks out there with no money. There are folks out there that don't have a family that they can fall back on, no families, no job security. I mean, these are painful situations. And if you're going to hire them, as Kimberly said, pay attention, make sure you've got a little bit of money in the bank. If you're doing this from a nonprofit perspective, then identify with them. Figure out what their needs are, right? So empathy. Empathy is a huge thing. Leadership is the second thing. I look at all of us on this phone call. We all need to be stepping up right now in different roles and be a leader. Listen, think of your goals. Look at the pieces that you have to work with. Everybody on this phone call has assets. Everybody does. Look at how you can use those assets, then lay out a plan and build the team that you want, right? If you look at, and look, you might not be the top player in the entrepreneurial team. If you look at it like an army, you've got a general, you've got a captain, you've got a lieutenant, you have a sergeant, you have a corporal, and then the people that do the work. You can be a leader as a worker, you can be a leader as a corporal, you can be a leader as a sergeant. It doesn't matter where you are. You can be entrepreneurial and you can be a leader, right? The final thing I always try to do is look with equity and fairness. I mean, look, it's an old saying, but do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I'm telling you, there's nothing that's more true. Think about how you want to treat your people. Always be fair, always be honest. And I promise you what you'll do, it'll build loyalty for the ups and the downs. Huge, huge thing. So that's kind of the principles if you're looking at building a team. Then right now in this world, you've got to look at a short-term and a long-term plan. And I think Kimberly put it well, a crisis plan is what you jump into right now is some kind of a crisis plan. I'd look at the long-term needs out there right now. Right now, everybody needs security. Everybody needs food. Everybody needs shelter. We're back to the basics. You heard Michael talk about 66 out of 80 of his young people lost their jobs. That's terrible, right? We need jobs. And above and beyond that, I'm going to wrap it all together. We need to bring people together. Need to bring people together. And there's a lot of things you can do to bring people together by being entrepreneurial. In the long term, if I was doing the things in the short term, then I would simply be laying the foundation to kind of evolve that into the long term in my business. And I'm going to use City Year as kind of an example. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the board chair of City Year this year, and I'm really proud of what the young people over there did. As you know, all of DISD had to close due to COVID-19. We had an immediate short-term crisis, as Kimberly said. And I'm telling you, the folks over there, they worked closely with DISD and they couldn't have been more brilliant. Were there some issues? It was difficult. But our team worked closely with DISD principals and staff. They reached out to the kids. We had, luckily, our 80 kids had great relationships to build on, and they had the backing of DISD, which was huge. DISD had a wonderful virtual plan that was there, but you know what, had they ever used it? Probably not. Again, it was crisis management. They were a great partner. We were able to, with DISD, give kids a purpose and a structure and some sense of security. And that's so important in this day and time. Imagine being, you know, a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, your mom is still working, or maybe you only have a mom at home, or maybe they're not there. You need somebody that can reach out to and you can talk to, and hopefully we filled that gap. I feel strongly we filled that gap. If you evolve that into the longer term about where we need to be as City Year, we have learned a lesson. And again, I'm going to echo what Kimberly said about crisis management. This thing hit us right up on the side of the head. We need to be able to build our relationships, not only physically, but we need to be able to build those relationships virtually. Because if we can do that, we can even be stronger, and there's no telling when this might happen again. And so those are skill sets that we're taking out of this, and we're learning on how to do it. And if you look at that, there were about 10 different examples of entrepreneurship in there that a lot of the team over there, they're not entrepreneurs if you think about it, but they are, because they managed to figure it out on the fly. And that's what entrepreneurship is. It's about when your cheese gets moved, you adapt to the cheese, or you go make the cheese to begin with. And that's what some of the guys do. So I hope that helps. I would tell you that the one thing that I'm going to say to you in this day and time, if I were looking to be an entrepreneur and to get entrepreneurial, and if I even had a job at a nonprofit, or if I was working for a company, it would be all about cooperate, cooperate, cooperate. I would tell you that if you look at what we need out there, we've got CPAL, we've got the great folks at United Way, we've got TFA, Teaching Trust. I mean, I happen to know most of the education was pretty well. We all need to come together because it's going to take a huge village to heal what we're going through now. And I know we can do it. So I think I've said what I said. We'll see what happens. Michael, take it away, my friend. You're on.
Hey, thanks, Ken. You know, you've contributed an amazing amount to the community, and it's been you know, fantastic to hear your views and Kimberly's views today. You know, I've started a number of for-profit organizations, and entrepreneurship is a key part of who I am. I think the skill set is easily applied to the nonprofit world, and you know, I wanted to talk a little bit today about some tactics that can be used in order to enhance nonprofit operations during COVID in this difficult time to kind of get results. I've had a lot of people ask me during this time, you know, how do we get through it? You know, resources are limited. There's a lot of uncertainty. It's, you know, it's something that there's the whole world's dealing with these problems, whether you're in the nonprofit sector or in business. And there are a few tools that we've used that have been really valuable in business that I wanted to share here today. And the first is something I talked about before at another SVP session, which is the 8-week cash flow analysis. And before you start saying, well, I'm not an accountant, or I'm not an analyst, or I'm not a finance guy, it doesn't have to be very fancy. Basically, you know, we've had companies and we've had small entrepreneurs write down what cash they're going to get in on a weekly basis and what cash is going to go out on a weekly basis, and do that every week for 8 weeks and update it. And it's been an amazing tool to give people comfort and security and to have visibility into their operations and their lives. And it's one that I think that you know, we need to talk about, you know, as a tactic to make life better during during COVID. So, you know, I know it's super granular and not big picture, but it's a great tool and technique that can be used here. Secondly, weekly business model strategy sessions. I mean, we're all, you know, it's how many times have we woken up on Monday and the world's been totally different on Wednesday in the last 8 to 12 weeks. I mean, it's just changing incredibly quickly. And, you know, we talk about now, next, and new in our strategy sessions that we do weekly with our executives. And my private equity investment business, we're not investing in giant companies. We invest in companies that are 10 to 50 million of revenue. You know, they can be anywhere from teams of 25 people to hundreds of people. So these are not giant organizations, and some of these tools can be used for even smaller organizations. But in these weekly business model strategy sessions, we focus on now, next, and new. What do we need to do now? What do we need to do next? And what do we need to do that's new? And that third piece is super important, and it's uncomfortable to focus on because, it's critically important with the dynamic nature of today's world. You know, what we did last week may not be the right thing to do this week, and so we believe that weekly strategy sessions. And if you're a one-man band, you know, find a friend, find somebody else that knows your world, and do that session with them. If you've got an organization, pull your team in and participate in a strategy session. You know, we've seen organizations need to pivot and change what they're doing, and so, you know, you need to talk about what's core to what you do and what you supply in those sessions, and how those things can transfer to other endeavors. So don't be afraid to try something new. And the third thing that you know, it's an entrepreneurial strategy that we've used to manage through COVID-19 is expense management. And I know this is something that, you know, it's uncomfortable to talk about and deal with. All organizations and individuals are having to deal with reduced revenue. Most are having to deal with reduced revenues right now. And, you know, when you need to have expense management meetings, strategy sessions, in addition to the one I just talked about, weekly. And if you've got an organization that is, it depends on where you are in your life cycle. If you're more mature and you've got reserves, you don't have to be as aggressive about it. If you're you know, it's a new endeavor or not, you don't have a lot of padding, then you need to be aggressive about it, and you need to think about it in the context of how to serve the most stakeholders. You know, if you want to preserve the organization in a difficult time, you're going to have to make difficult choices, and you're going to have to do it dispassionately and quickly if things are not going well. I'll tell you that most small organizations don't do it fast enough, and it's really something that we should all think about, no matter how unpleasant. You got to be creative. You got to be entrepreneurial. You got to be flexible, and you know, everybody will get through this. It's just part of kind of an entrepreneurial mindset. So the most important thing to remember here is there will be a recovery, and we're already, there's terrible unrest. There's all sorts of injustice in the world right now, but and always has been, but it's obviously magnified right now. We'll get through this, and you need to remember that you know, this too shall pass, and nonprofits are incredibly important, more important than they've ever been in this landscape. They're going to help the government direct resources to the folks that need those resources the most. They're going to highlight where we need to do work. It's just incredibly important that we support our small nonprofits and make sure that they're sustainable. So, Prisma, I don't know who's next.
Jorge Baldor is next. He's going to have maybe a couple slides, but after that, we're gonna really, just listen to Michael Thomas and hear what he, have him ask a couple questions. I'm sure he's picked up a lot of good information as well as our audience, but we'll pass it on to George and then we'll jump over to Michael Thomas.
Thank you, Prisma. Well, I think, we've heard a lot of, the ideas about how it's time to adapt and it's time to cooperate and collaborate. And I think that's a common theme that we're hearing. But I think we need to also step back and realize that, maybe everyone will not get through this and start analyzing it that way. I think it's really great to have a positive attitude and look toward the future with everything's going to be fine and great again, but it's just not going to be. We need to understand that for a lot of people, it's not going to be. So I think we just need to understand, there's going to be a little Darwinism going on, not only in the nonprofits, but in the for-profits as well. Realistically speaking, the numbers are staggering if you see how many nonprofits there are. In North Texas alone, the last figures I saw were 2016. There were 23,436 nonprofits. That's a lot. Not all of them are going to be sustainable. And to Kimberly's point, sustainability is what this is about. So just having a great idea or a lot of passion to get out and want to, make your statement and create something that has your stamp on it, it's great, but it's not, that alone is not going to be sustainable. So we need to understand that. Nationally, we have 1.56 million nonprofits. So we are not going to all survive. And so I think we just maybe need to change and step back and change the mindset of how we approach this conversation and conversations going forward to make it something a little bit more realistic and as it should be. On the for-profit side of it, to Michael's point, the more marginalized are the ones that are affected more directly for unemployment. And here in our area and in a lot of different areas, the undocumented workers, particularly those that were working in the service industries, were the most immediately affected and the ones that had the most difficulty later on finding a second type of job. There are a lot of warehouse jobs that are available that people are taking as temporary jobs until their regular job may be coming online, but those jobs aren't even available to the undocumented workers. So that's even a double whammy. There's zero federal benefits that are coming, even for families if one person in the family is not documented. So even the American citizens in the family, spouse or children, are not eligible for benefits if one person's not. So this is an even more difficult population that we need to always kind of keep in mind as we're doing. The key to, I think, for small and medium businesses in particular, are really to adapt, to learn to adapt. That the ways that things that we have been used to doing is, we need to adapt to technology. A lot of times the issue there is that the lack of education or lack of access to technology. So that's been a really challenge for smaller and medium-sized businesses, which are the ones that create a lot of the jobs that we see locally. So I think one of the programs that I've seen very successful through the Dallas Regional Chamber has a few programs. And Prisma, I don't know if you have the slides to present. If not, we can provide them later. But there are three particular programs that I think would be of interest. That one is the Future of Work program, and these are available. Information is available through the Dallas Regional Chamber, their website. This is really practical information that should be reviewed at any level of business. I think we would all gain something from that. The next one is a really important program that we've seen really for the first time. This is the larger businesses and organizations in our region that have decided to stop what they're doing reach down and reach around. And so they're offering free mentorship programs to medium and smaller sized businesses in their industries so that they can provide their expertise and their marketing skills and their approach to adaptation at no cost to these businesses. So this is a free program that I think a lot of smaller businesses and even nonprofits can take care of. And, you know, again, this is information is available on the Dallas Regional Chamber website. The last one is one of the other programs that's not really been talked about much. And it is a fund that's just being developed. It's not fully developed at this point, but it's a up to $25,000 cash infusion for minority-owned businesses. So this is an opportunity that's very direct and to see what we're doing. But so there are opportunities there. I think we just need to come back and take a deep look and see, you know, is your organization one that maybe would work better to collaborate and work together with another organization that has a very similar mission or ideas, but that maybe together you can be a stronger and more sustainable, or how you market yourself, you know, in a very specific manner. But that's what I have, Prisma. Thank you.
Thank you, George. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Thomas. I know he's prepared a couple questions, and he may have a couple others that have come up. And I want to remind everyone in the audience and also our panelists that this is an experience of mutual learning. So feel free to ask questions and you know, of Michael, and you know, Michael will be asking questions. So we'll turn it over to him.
Great. Well, much appreciated. I have a separate Word document that's been going, and I mean, the value that I've already received from just listening to the SVP partners talk has been monumental. It's also I think helped establish that some of the things that we're doing right now actually are the right tracks. So I appreciate everybody's comments so far. Before a few questions, just thought I'd provide kind of the context of where the questions are coming from. Specifically the nature of the nonprofit organization and kind of embracing an entrepreneurial spirit, which I think by default has a weird, unsettling feeling for a lot of people to think, you know, nonprofit making money. And I think I talk about it a lot because I think it's a fascinating topic, and I also think this is incredibly important, that the concept of for-profit and not for-profit creates a false mindset that nonprofits really shouldn't be focused on making money. And if we're asking these organizations to solve systemic problems and major societal problems, you can't do that without funding. So by default, the not-for-profit and the way that we think about these things, donors are conditioned, board members are conditioned to feel a certain way about the charity having an entrepreneurial spirit. And so I think by default, there's a million issues there that need to be unpacked. And clearly, Prisma, just a head nod. This is a 7-hour seminar, correct? We have that much time to discuss this topic. Is that right? No, we don't. Okay. Well.
No.
Okay. We'll move quicker than through this. I thought I'd provide a little highlight on one that we're working on, and just to prove the value of having the entrepreneurial spirit. Our organization really for years has embodied, even without getting involved in the for-profit world, has always embodied the nature of the entrepreneurial spirit as it relates to programming, doing new things, trying things out, kind of, you know, launching into initiatives that then become major programs or could become major funding streams for us as well. But a few years ago, really started discussing the nature of the opportunity that existed in the for-profit world. Founded a benefit corporation called Impact. And we're so fortunate that a year and some change ago, we had that established. And it was actually our project through Ground Floor, or what the United Way calls Social Innovation Accelerator, was the creation of that entity. And because we did that, it put us in a position to have conversations about for-profit initiatives that could benefit our organization. And the beginning part of the year, we partnered with a really well-known social impact business called Soap Hope. And to be totally frank, in January, when we officially created the entity and partnered, the expectation then was not to be public until probably June, July, August, because we had a lot of work to do. And then February hit, and there's this thing called coronavirus rolling around, and then March hit, and we were staring down the barrel of a complete loss of funding everywhere else. And at the same time, the whole world was saying, what you need to do is wash your hands with soap. And we're all looking around at each other going, holy crap, we have a soap business. Like, go and go quickly. And really, we've put so much time and effort into that business is doing very well. It exists to employ people with disabilities and to prove the value of that inclusive employment. But now it's a revenue stream. And the hope is in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, it's a major piece of funding for the organization. And so if this ever happens again, and the state still doesn't understand the nature of how funding nonprofits should work, we have another leg of the stool to lean on. So that's the nature of the context. I wanted to provide a little bit of info there before asking a few questions. And Kim, I think the first one's for you, because you made a couple of comments that really connect to one of the questions. And you mentioned the nature of not bringing on people when you don't have enough capital for them, which is a pretty sound business decision. And then also having money in the bank, that there needs to be reserves set aside, both of which are completely aligned with. Then there's this question about the nature of investing in strategic growth versus cash in the bank. You know, that's a strange conversation, but where is that, do you think, for a nonprofit organization looking to launch into an entrepreneurial initiative of some sort?
So I think one of the things, there are a few things. Number one, I have said for years, if we continue to do things the way that we've always done things, we're going to continue to get what we've got. And when it comes to the nonprofit community, we have done really well at keeping things in a traditional way. We are not educating the nonprofit community enough. That's why I'm really glad for these workshops, because to me, it adds a different dynamic and different texture to the conversations around training and information availability to the sector. But realistically, we are still training people the exact same way. And with that, and then we look at our boards of nonprofits, we tend to just take people because they want to sit on our board. But if we know we want to grow in that way and become more entrepreneurial, are you identifying potential board members that have that type of experience? Because if not, all you're going to have is a room full of 11 people, and you're going to talk about the same thing, and no one's able to move it because they don't have the background to assist in doing that. And so I think one of the huge problems that we see throughout the sector is that we can't see this type of strategic growth with this entrepreneurial mindset if the people that are responsible for governance do not have the experience to help push that forward. You know, we look at governance and we forget what governance really means to a nonprofit organization and that fiduciary responsibility. And so if we're looking at something a lot more innovative and no one has the experience, then the organization really has to dig deep and say, how do we shift who's sitting at the table, or bring additional people into the organization that are sitting at the table? The leadership of the organization is going to push it forward more than anything. And I do think that it's uber important that organizations start looking at opportunities to bring in revenue a lot differently besides grants, individual donations, and relying on government funds. I have said for years, I am an example of leading an organization that lost $1 million in guaranteed funding with money that it's already started coming in, simply because there was a change in Washington, D.C., and the money had to be reallocated to the Department of Defense. And so overnight, I had the equivalent of what's happening because of COVID-19 many moons ago. And that's why crisis management is so important to me. But the one thing I don't think we did well was start looking at how do we bring in more diverse revenue into the organizations. We kept relying on the same model that we had done for years. And so when I speak about this and strategic growth and reserve funds and looking at things differently, I'm actually speaking from experience. And I don't want anybody to have that type of experience. It's a hard lessons to learn, but you don't have to have that lesson if you actually listen and start putting in the practice. I think it also comes down to education and investing in the organization and the people that are responsible for making the decision, the people that are responsible for vetting and bringing different opportunities to the table. And when you don't know about something, doing the research so that you are all educated. I think it's really more important nowadays for organizations to bring some level of educational element into the board meetings to ensure that everybody's getting the same information and it's not just coming from the executive director or CEO or the board chair, that there's someone from the outside that's going to come in and help to understand that information. But realistically, you have to look at the data. That's another thing that we don't look at. The data is really showing us that we can't rely on those more traditional ways of being funded. And Michael, I think I've always told you this, but I think you've done a great job, even despite what's happening in this season. You've done a great job in building my possibilities over the years. And it's because you do think more innovatively. And if we could see whether the organization, small or large, because not every organization needs to be super duper large, they just need to be sustainable. And in order to become sustainable in this day and age, it has to come from this more entrepreneurial mindset. And then for the leaders that are out there, and I can't remember who said it earlier, but the leader, I think it was Ken, the leader doesn't always have to be the person that's sitting in the top seat, but your leaders have to lead. And if you are no longer in a position where you can take the organization to the next level, I think the most appropriate thing to do is to either shift and move or bring somebody in that can fill in that deficit for the organization as well.
I love it. I got two things that I think I want to provide one more piece on that you just said that I think are instrumental. One is the nature of how we've always done things in this sector being part of the dilemma, right? We just have always looked at funding the same way. We cannot go back after a 10-week, 3-month shutdown of effectively many funding sources for the charitable sector, and then just go, it's cool. We can go back to having, galas and everything's going to be fine. So now more than ever, organizations should be thinking about other revenue streams.
Absolutely.
The other thing that you said that I think is so crucial here is not only finding board members who are do you have an entrepreneur on your board? If the answer is no, like clearly there's a dilemma there if they're the ones governing the decisions of the organization. But on top of that, just having a collective board who agree on the value of moving into an entrepreneurial path. That is, even if they don't have the skill set, if you've got a group of people in the room that all don't think it's a good idea, even if you've got that guy in the room, it doesn't matter. So it really is just a bigger board conditioning. And a lot of that happens, vetting board members as they come in. So thank you for that, Kim.
You're welcome.
I've got, so another question here, and this one's going to Ken. Ken, just, at face value, and maybe you've got a different kind of perspective on this, just knowing how much you've been involved in the charitable sector, but what is your immediate reaction to hearing something like charities want to be active in the for-profit sector? What's your gut response to that?
Look, Michael, I love it. I would say to you that they need to be active in the for-profit sector. And I would even offer to you that I feel, and maybe I'm a little crazy about this, but a lot of the business principles that work in the for-profit sector, they already have to do in the nonprofit sector. They just have a different product, right? They're selling a service, if you think about it. A nonprofit is selling a service, right? And they have to figure out all the same basic principles. So to me, look, you give me a successful nonprofit executive and I'll take them any day of the week if they're really good, right? They've got good selling skills. So I love it. And I think we need to get over this, because I think you could almost look at Celanese as an example. There's a company, Celanese, that is an amazing place, and they do really well, but they've got a huge nonprofit arm. We should probably be asking, why don't a lot of companies get involved and have a nonprofit, right? 6 of one, half dozen of the other. And I would tell you that Celanese has kind of done that. They give their executives, they give a lot of money, and they get active, right? So I would tell you that my initial reaction is I love it. And, I think the more the merrier in it. right? The skills are the same. You've got messaging, marketing, advertising, goal development. It's all there. Selling, it's all there.
Yeah, I think that really what we'll see, what we've seen historically, or at least over the last 10 to 15 years, is 20 years maybe. And I do believe it's a generational thing, not to get all preachy on millennial topics or anything, but we've always existed in the US in this mindset of make your money in one place and give it to another. And over the last 15 years or so, we've seen this slow intersection of for-profit companies that are really socially minded, and they're way more vocal about it. And then it's bringing charities closer into this. And we're living in a gray area where now I wholeheartedly believe the future of solving some of these societal problems and nonprofits becoming truly impactful long-term is going to be contingent upon how much they move over and get involved in the for-profit sector. I was hoping you'd say that, Ken, and not do the thing that most people do.
Look at what you did with the soap. That was classic. You looked at that. Anytime you're doing this, you look at either your skills or the products that you have, right? You figure out what the market niche is, what the timing is on something, what's needed out there, right? What's a need to have versus a nice to have, and then you lined it all up, and that's exactly what you did with your soap business.
Appreciate
that. By the way, you need to send me some of your soap so I can sample.
It's funny. We have just made our first batch of our own product, and somebody may or may not have spilled some of the essential oil, and so our whole building right now is just like pure lavender, which is great, but also it's a little intense.
Next, Michael, can I add something really quickly on top of that? One of the things you all said about, I always say that charities are businesses, and that the 501c3 designation just happens to be a tax status, right? And so that needs to be the mindset moving forward. The difference is that, just add on to the last comments that you were making, when we look at social impact for-profit organizations versus nonprofit, I think one of the big differences that we see and why impact investing and social impact organizations are taking off is because they look at it with thinking from a business perspective. They look at the end and build back, where nonprofits come up with a mission and just try to get through day to day, right? And I think that from an entrepreneurial perspective, nonprofits have got to get to the point where they start with the end in mind. What are you trying to address? And then bring it back, and not look at how do I just keep this organization running on a day-to-day basis. And I think if many organizations could get to that point, we could see more sustainable organizations throughout the sector, especially in North Texas.
I love it. It's such an important point, because you really did draw a very clean comparison between the mindset of the two organizations. The typical charity really isn't thinking about $100 million a year gross revenue. The entrepreneurial business, the guys that are going out there to create a purple widget to sell, like their first start point is, how do we get bought by Google? And like, how do we become $1 billion business? And then they work to what they need to do today. If we did that in the charitable sector, we'd start solving problems, right? If we do it well. That's a great point. So I don't even know how to pivot from that one. And I just said a word I'm not allowed to say, and my staff is going to yell at me for it. So the next question, this one for George, I have a question about just the nature of the next steps. And what are your thoughts or tips on a nonprofit organization that's thinking about becoming more entrepreneurial? So let's say they don't have a business, they're maybe haven't made steps on the board yet. What would you say to that organization about what they need to do right now to begin moving forward?
Well, I think to your point earlier, the point that was made, that you need to be selective about who's on your board. And if you don't have that entrepreneurial mindset from the board itself and getting that direction, then the rest is just not going to get what you need to be. I think it's important to understand the sustainability part of it and different models, as we've heard over and over again today, that you just need to diversify and do that. So I think, starting with the board, I think is where I would go.
Appreciate that. I think it's, we lean on the board for governance, and at the same time, a lot of these ideas are coming programmatically, and without the support from that kind of mindset on a board level, they don't move. And it's a whole other conversation about the difference between boards that are truly governing and boards that are really more of working. And typically an organization thinking about kind of a new initiative like this may be small enough to still have a working board, or at least a hybrid. And at that point, you're right. It clearly is going to have to take complete buy-in from their side. Michael, you asked, or you said something earlier and kind of dove into general nature of the fourth question that I had. And you were giving some general suggestions on things that an organization could do that you're seeing in the entrepreneurial world, of which, by the way, I jotted down all of them. So I thought maybe rather than just repeating the question, because the general question I had was, what are some pointers you would give for an organization in the nonprofit in the entrepreneurial space? And I think you gave a couple really good examples. Is there anything that you would expand on as like just the primary right now, today, start doing this if you're thinking about progressing forward in the entrepreneurial space?
Sure. I mean, if you're going to develop an entrepreneurial plan, forgive me for using the word business plan, but that's what it is. Just start with planning. I mean, a lot of nonprofit leaders don't realize, or don't have the time, but also don't realize that a traditional for-profit leader spends 25 to 40% of their time planning. And you need to make sure that you create a strategic plan with milestones. And one of the failures that I see in the nonprofit world a lot is failure to iterate. If you set up a plan with milestones and you continue to miss those milestones, you need to change your plan. And it's something that I just don't see nonprofit leaders doing enough. And if something's not working, don't continue to bang your head against the wall. Pivot. And it's always good when there's some sort of block like that to reach out and get help from somebody outside your organization. Phone a friend, find somebody, an SVP partner, shameless plug, that can help you sort through kind of what's going on. So I just think that strategic planning, budgeting, I know everybody talks about their budget. A lot of these budgets I see in nonprofits are overly complex. You should have an operational budget that you can stick to, and whether if you're trying to build a social enterprise or some sort of impact investment, it's same thing. I mean, create a budget, create a plan for that project. And these things don't have to be, you can do it with a pen and paper. I mean, we all have computers, but these things, I'm just trying to illustrate, they don't have to be overly complex. So I'm just a big fan of planning, and I don't think I see nonprofit leaders omit that many times.
And just to add on, Michael, you said something that I think is so true in terms of the thought and the mindset in the nonprofit community, but it has to go away that nonprofit leaders do not have time to plan. If they don't have time to plan, I mean, realistically, they shouldn't be in that position because there is a level of responsibility that they have to move that organization forward. And if you're not planning, then you're existing, you're not moving the organization. And then the last part, in terms of anybody that works with me knows that I am on budgets at all times. If you do not know your costs, if you don't know how much pens cost, if you can't justify that one simple thing, you can't justify or don't know how to justify the larger expenses. Every single item and I think, Michael, to your point, one of the problems is you see organizations say, I need 10,000. Well, what does that 10,000 cover? Honestly, they need 20, or they only need 2,000. And so they've over or under budgeted in a lot of different ways. And that's why it looks so complex, because those numbers are just written down and thrown together. And that's the truth about what's happening in the nonprofit sector. Those budgets should take time to develop. So it's a realistic projection of what the organization needs. You know your baseline. If I lose money, this is what I need to get through the year. And here's the additional money that I need to do all of those extra things that would be, the wins, but it's not going to kill the organization if I don't get that in.
You know, I want to touch on one thing as well that I think we're all dancing around a little bit. And I'm speaking to everybody that might be out there, particularly that are board members. We need to pay our people well. If we want to get these results, if we want them to do this, there's absolutely no reason they shouldn't be compensated like we're compensated in the private sector. That's what this is all coming together you're talking about, Michael, right? And if you're on a board, that's kind of what you need to do, right? And that's what the organization needs to survive. And if we want to build the business like that, that's what it's going to take. So I think we all have to have compensation conversations.
There's a strange disconnect between being uncomfortable with an executive of a incredibly important charitable organization making $500,000 a year, but being totally comfortable with the football coach for a local university making $7 million as a nonprofit employee. We're asking one to solve massive societal problems and the other to have a good record at the end of the season. And that in and of itself is just one of the issues associated with the ways that we think about charity. But I agree with you. If you can't compensate your top level talent accordingly, then they are going to leave, and then you're left with a hole in your growth.
And it's not just our top level. I say this, and I'm unapologetic in saying it. We cannot try to do better and build economic prosperity in communities if our employees are suffering. We far too often in the nonprofit community, we expect employees to do more to build other people and get them out of poverty, but they are being drowned in poverty. And we've got to start talking on that level. Organizations, the leaders have to be comfortable in saying, I don't have what I need to ensure that my employees are okay. We've got to stop thinking it's okay to have our employees suffer with no health care while we're trying to find healthcare programs for the people that we serve and find just vouchers and coupons and all of these other things while we are struggling to pay the salary we promised to employees. And, the reason why our sector doesn't get the respect is because we won't put the respect on it. And when we begin to put the respect on this sector, that this is a business, these are businesses that we're running that just happen to be charities that are doing good in the community. And we have this special tax designation that allows us a lot more flexibility in some ways and limitations in others. Until we're truthful about that and stop this purpose and passion, and that's a beautiful thing. But at the end of the day, if we're trying to eradicate or address something, we have to be honest about what it takes, because we can't move forward if we don't have the resources to be able to do it.
100%, Kim. I appreciate you drawing the importance of comprehensive pay and comprehensive benefits for staff. I think the one of all the hangups in the system, one of the other things that needs to happen soon is, from a funding perspective, we need to get beyond solely asking the question of efficiency that's wrapped up in those percentages, because that's the only thing that comes out in a funding conversation. And a question that happens in a world where we have these weird concepts that somebody that's on my billing team is not part of our cause, that somebody that is a fundraiser that's going out and communicating the importance of what we do is not a part of our cause, that only if you are in direct contact with your mission does it get to fill that piece of the pie. And by default, that means organizations in this sector are limited in what they can do and pay and benefit, because it's, well, if we give these benefits, that's going to increase this administrative, and then our percent's going to come down, so we can't do it. That's an absolutely horrid place for an organization to live, and to some degree, it's predicated by how we're funded.
Well, and Michael, I think that gets back to what George was talking about in the very beginning, about there's so many nonprofits out there that, if you have some shrinkage, there's more money to go around, right? And we as philanthropists and donors and everybody on the phone, board members, we owe it to ourselves. If we're not accomplishing our mission, we need to fold those organizations together, right? Yeah. Then there'll be more money, there'll be healthcare, there'll be everything, Kimberly, that our employees deserve. There's no reason an employee, whether they're a nonprofit or whatever, should not have health care.
I agree.
Yeah. They need to be treated like first-class citizens. I mean, we're all citizens here, right? So And I think that's what's going to close that gap that you're talking about.
And there's
right?
one more thing that happens when organizations merge like that, or when they come
Look,
together.
I think we have right now, Dallas, if you look at the funding community, we all scramble after the same dollars. That's the idea. And we just divide it. What we probably need to do is, and I think George has a great idea, come through this, we're stronger together, better together, I think is what the Lyda Hill thing is trying to accomplish.
Sure.
I think that could be a home run. You could have more well-funded, they could take longer term, they'd have more cash in the bank, they could take longer term views, and we'd all come out of this stronger.
And the irony there is that the issue I was talking about a second ago in regards to efficiency, when organizations come together like that and they stop replicating and duplicating expenses across the board, and then they leverage each other's talents and skill sets, they become more efficient. They're actually solving that problem. And there's probably another 200 examples in just the city of Dallas proper where organizations coming together and unifying would create more impact and more efficiency at the same time.
I know we're going to move on in a minute, but I would not be a great representative for my causes in the startup nonprofit community if I did not say this. We have a lot of small startup nonprofits that have better data than established organizations. They have been on the ground, and I'm being honest, some of them I have not seen funded through any of the relief funds, but they are the ones that I know for sure can tell you everything that's happened since before we started shutting down and what's happening today. And I think we have to stop looking at larger is better. And what we have to look at is who is more effective, who has the outcomes, who can tell the story, not who has the best marketing spin on issues, because what that really means is, are we really telling the true stories of what's happening in marginalized communities if we are not really working with people that know what's happening within the communities? And that's something that really pushes my button, because there are too many people that are working without, and they are doing far better work than those that have $3, $4, $5 and $1 million budgets. And that is totally unfair in this sector.
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to, I think with that, I don't know if there are any final comments from Michael Thomas about, the conversation we've had today. If not, we're going to move to a couple of questions that we have from the audience. And if you're in the audience and you would like to submit a question, there should be a button on the bottom of your screen that has the Q&A, and you could submit a question there, and we'll try to answer these now, or we will respond in the chat via chat on here. So I have a couple of questions here related to board, and I know that earlier Kim did address some specifics, and Michael as well, talked about their board and how it's so important to have a board and proper governance, and also just moving into these spaces where, creating new programs or even generating funding and so we have a couple people who submitted a question about governance and board, and so we have a question here that says how does a person or a board if we have people on the board who do not have extensive knowledge or experience, so what's the first step? I know that potentially we want to recruit the right people, but say that we already have a board and maybe they're not experienced or on, ready to move into something like, a new program or entrepreneurial mindset.
Every board member should have an onboarding process. If there are books that you can give, like one standard book that every board member has to buy or is given, boards should go through training. External people should be brought in. I always say too, but then we need to reassess. Just because someone's on the board and their term may not be up, especially for organizations that have these 2 and 3 year terms, if it's not a great fit, I think it's time for a mutual conversation between board leadership and whomever it is on the board, because that's what's fair. We've got to get past, for me, get past hurting feelings at the board and the employee level if our goal is mission driven. If we're taking care of people the right way, but it's not a good fit for the mission, then we have to be honest and address that. But if you have good people that may have connections, they're just inexperienced, find good board training for them online, send them someplace. There are a number of resources going around, have them read. I think board members have to do their due diligence, but I also think the organization has to do a great job at bringing their folks on board, and even possibly pair them up with someone who does have board experience and has experience on that particular board that can help to fill in some of the institutional knowledge gaps that they may have coming in as well.
Well, also, Kimberly, you also have on a lot of the boards, you've got subcommittees where you can get some good experience coming in through a subcommittee before you actually become a board member. So those are really good. And I'd look at your personal skill sets, you know, kind of what you've done, because look, if you look at a board, it's usually governance and HR. You've got fundraising, which is marketing and everything else. And you've got a lot of KPIs that you really want to dig into. And there's enough broad stroke there that if you get in under somebody, kind of what Kimberly said, you let somebody kind of mentor you and get on a subcommittee or kind of be an assistant, and it'll happen quick, really quick. The big thing is the passion. If you have the passion for the work, you can learn the rest. That's the key.
It has to be a good fit.
Yep.
Yeah. To Kimberly's point, I think there's a responsibility for the organization in selecting that board, that they're just not looking for a mirror. You need to have people on the board that are willing to speak up and say, you know, the direction is maybe not the best direction, and that, you know, that they're not there, or they're there. And I've seen this on boards where you have someone that's maybe a minority that's on a board, that you may be the only minority or one of a few minorities on a large board. And sometimes there's an intimidation factor in speaking up and thinking that your opinion is not as valued or is not as important, and where I think the opposite is the truth. And I think that, you know, you're there for a reason, not there to fill a quota. And I think that understanding is really important. Oftentimes I see that, particularly in nonprofits where boards are really friends of the executive director, and, you know, people that are going to support all the programs without, you know, a checklist. And that doesn't serve the nonprofit. It doesn't serve those that are on the board, doesn't serve the employees that are in part of the organization.
I call it a lifestyle business, George. It's a lifestyle business, and that's what you can build. They're very comfortable to build a lifestyle business. Like that, I think that's what Kimberly was touching on earlier. And we don't need that right now.
At all.
That won't survive. Those are the organizations that won't survive.
So with that, I'm gonna move on to another question, and I know we've seen a couple questions related to board specifically, but you know, just given the time, I do want to ask this particular question, and I know you know, most of you are SVP partners, and you know, SVP, we're working to help educate our philanthropists. And so there's a question here that says, how could philanthropists themselves become more entrepreneurial? I think, you know, also just thinking about this question, we're seeing potentially business leaders feel one way about the business sector, and then coming to these nonprofits maybe feel like it's a charity. You know, there are questions about salary, things like that. So how can philanthropists themselves become more entrepreneurial and have these same principles maybe in terms of donors?
Prisma, I think they've been saying it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Be the square peg in a room, right? Hold people accountable. That's all entrepreneurship is finding a message, asking the right questions, and then driving to a solution. And look, I think that's really what we need. We need a lot of these board members, and I'm hoping we're talking to a lot of them, is to get up and do your job, right? The organization's going to go where you want it to go. And I think that's how you can become more entrepreneurial.
And to Ken's point, I think that when you're speaking to either the executive director or the board in general, having the conversations about these organizations, just sit back and hear what is being said. You know, how much of that conversation is about the person being served, and how much of it is about the individual personality or the groups or, the different things that are just taking the eye off the ball. Because the ball is who's actually getting the frontline service and how that organization meets that need. So the less amount that they're talking about that, the more red flags.
Yeah, I will. I'll plug a book that I just finished last night. And most people in this thread and that are listening are probably familiar with Dan Pilato, but he just put out a very quick read book. It's about 45-minute read called The Everyday Philanthropist. And that question, the nature of how does a philanthropist become more like an entrepreneur? It is the quick, just down your throat version of that question, and it's an answer to it. And truthfully, it's telling people to treat their donation to a charity the same way they would treat their investment in a business. Gauge it or I guess grade it by the same standards. Don't say, oh well, they're a charity, they're trying. No, hold them to the same guidelines you would an investment. If you're not seeing a return, then it's a bad donation. But in that case, we're asking people to legitimately, you see a lot of nonprofits say, invest in us, which is a fun way of us saying, go ahead and donate. But in this case, Dan would be saying, you need to be investing in them and doing it the same way you treat the rest of your portfolio.
Thank you. I think in terms of, wrapping up this session, we are getting close to our time. And so I want to make sure that we close out on time. Are there any last comments related to the topic or anything else you'd like to share? I'm speaking to all the panelists, if there are some final words that you'd like to share with our audience.
I'd just like to say, don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. In order to find sustainable solutions for your organization, you're going to need to be innovative and entrepreneurial and don't be self-conscious about that.
I'll just say, get out and move the needle, right? That's what we all need to do. Everybody on this phone, it's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to get out there and do it. We've talked about board responsibility here. We've talked about coming up with ideas and helping an organization pivot. We've talking about merging organizations. There are probably about 100 people on this phone call that we can really make an impact if we all go out there with some of this stuff and really push. Be the square peg at that board meeting, and they're going to get upset with you, but shake everybody up and let's get out of our comfort zone. Let's make some change. Right?
I think that's it. Because I'm the one that does it. So I totally agree with that, Ken. And I think the other part I just want to add on is for philanthropists to really understand how they can use their voice and their influence beyond their dollars. And how they can kind of influence. And we're talking about the intersection of philanthropy and government, the intersection of philanthropy and corporate, the intersection of philanthropy and the work that actually happens in the social sector, that at some point we still have to start bringing all of these sectors together to impact the change. And then there just happens to be organizations that will facilitate the work. And I think if philanthropists started understanding what the policy and the larger issues are, it would also help them to identify how they can use their treasures, whether it be their time, talent, or their financial resources as well.
Thank you. We're going to have to wrap up. I know that we could continue this conversation for, Michael Thomas said, 7 hours. I think I would argue we could probably keep going more than 7 hours. So, I want to thank all of our panelists and our audience today. We've had a lot of learning from My Possibilities and just all of our partners of sharing this experience together. And, My Possibilities is an advisee of SVP Dallas. And so we've had partners working with My Possibilities in the past through our pro bono consulting. SVP Dallas, we recognize that there are challenges with COVID-19 and they persist in nonprofits and small businesses alike. And we look forward to continuing this workshop series, just confronting those challenges and highlighting how social impact organizations can really deal with those challenges. At the same time, we know that there's just this long struggle of equity, for equity across our country. We're seeing it here in Dallas, in our backyard.
We're working for equity and systemic change, and that's really the core of SVP Dallas. And so if you'd like to learn more about SVP Dallas and join our community as an organization or as a partner, please visit our website at svpdallas.org. SVP Dallas has an event coming up. It's called How Can Solidarity Respond? It's part of our Respond series that we've been having, and we'll have an important discussion about how our community, and we'll have the honor of having Dr. Michael Sorrell, Dr. Heather Hackman. We'll also have Kimberly O'Neill back in that conversation. So please join us next week, June 9th, and you can register through our website, svpdallas.org. Thank you again for joining us for this hour and a half, and we look forward to seeing you next week.